that Deacon Linda read to us, Jesus' empty tomb and the resurrection. I think that's all sort of there, floating around our heads, but for some of us, why does that matter? So I want to talk to you today about Paul's writing, where Paul explains why this is important. I think we know what happened, so I'm not so much going to spend time talking about the what, but the why. Why does Jesus' resurrection matter? I've talked to people, and who are people of goodwill, bright, intelligent, and they say to me, you know, I know this story, but what has it got to do with me? What does it mean for me? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So I'm going to take our reading from 1 Corinthians, and I'm going to go into that and lay out what Paul is saying here. Because in this passage, we have the first creed of the church. Now, what's a creed? Later in the sermon, we're going to say the Nicene Creed. The creed are the statements around which we believe. They're, if you will, the borders, the guidelines around which our faith is centered. And Paul begins very, very clearly at the beginning here. Well, what is Corinth? Where is Corinth? Who were the Corinthians? Well, Corinth was, if you will, a combination of New Orleans, Las Vegas, and Manhattan. It was Sin City for the Mediterranean. What happened in Corinth, you took home with you in the form of a communicable disease. Corinth was the principal commercial center of the Eastern Mediterranean. Because of the way the winds worked, you couldn't easily round the southern Peloponnesus of Greece. So all the trade from the Orient, from Syria and Palestine and what we call Turkey today, had to come into the Aegean, and it went to the Gulf of Corinth on the Aegean side, and there the ships were unloaded. And at that point, the width of the isthmus of the Peloponnesus is only 10 miles wide. Below, on the south, looks like a giant hand sticking in the Mediterranean. To the north is the mainland of Greece. And Corinth was a city right on that little neck between east and west. So ships with cargo in the Orient would bring them into the Aegean side, unload, and the cargo be transshipped and reloaded on ships on the west side. Because from there, it was a straight run to Italy and to the west, and there was no winds to deal with. And because of that, Corinth was like Lecanto. Nobody was from there. It was a place where you made money. It was a place that you lived life in the now, in the fullest. It was a commercial city. It was a city where things were happening 24/7, where your neighbors, you didn't know they were gone next year. They're from all over the world. And Paul was called to preach and teach to the new tiny Christian community in this church that was formed in Corinth. Now, Corinth was a tough city. And there's actually in the Greek the verb, something called to Corinthianize. That means that something was so wild, so dirty, so over the top, that it could only happen in Corinth. Now, how many places do you know have a verb named after them? It was so bad, it was like Okeechobee almost. That was Corinth. Corinth had hills overlooking it, and on top of the hill was the temple for Aphrodite. And people would go to church, if you will, in the cult of Aphrodite. And what did you do in the Aphrodite's temple? You had sex with the prostitutes who worked there. And by having sex with the prostitutes, you were worshiping the goddess. Sounds like Las Vegas. This was the world in which the early Christians found themselves. And Corinth also was sort of like Los Angeles. It prided itself as being a city of culture, but in reality, it was just the fronts of buildings. It was all facades. Corinth thought, we're the successors to Athens, to the great $800 years before us. Plato and Aristotle and all the Greek dramatists. We are the city of Greece right now. And so Paul is approaching a city that is mired in what we would call decadence. That is a city where you live for making money now. Paul's also dealing with a city where the people who are, if you will, like to be cultured, they're into Greek philosophy. And there were 3 schools of philosophy to deal with. There was Platonism. Platonism believed that the soul is immortal. It's very much like Buddhism. That you die, but your soul goes onward. No bodily resurrection. It's the soul, the spirit that matters. The other popular school was Epicureanism. And that was, when you're dead, you're dead. So live life to the fullest now. When I go out in public with my collar on, people either are very nice to me or they want to tease me. And I got up early one day this week and I had breakfast before Susan was up, and I went to Granny's Diner and I sat at the counter. And there are guys who just love, because I've got the little piece of plastic on, to tell me what they're going to do this weekend. They're Epicureans. They're living for right now because there's no consequence. If they don't do it now, it's too late. This isn't something new. This isn't a new way of thinking. This has been around for 2,000 plus years. And the final philosophy that Paul had to contend with was Stoicism. Stoicism was, sort of stiff upper lip, just tough it out. But when you died, you were merged into God, into nature. You lost your individuality and became one with the great being. It's almost, I'm reminded like of the Woody Allen movies. Seriously, there's nothing new under the sun, folks. These philosophies, these attitudes, these ways of thinking, they were around in ancient Greece. And they were as powerful and cogent to people then as they are now. The same arguments that people tell you about, well, I don't really see what it has to do with me. What Jesus, that's nice. Christians are nice people, some of them are nasty. Well, what does God have to do with anything in my life? These aren't new questions. People had them 2,000 years ago in Corinth. And the church in Corinth, some of them decided, well, we really should get with the culture. And we can agree that Jesus was a wise teacher, a good counselor, a wonderful guy. In fact, Jesus should get on public television and sell tote bags and, just be one of these self-help gurus. And Paul is writing to them and saying, look, folks, if Christ did not die, if he wasn't crucified and he wasn't resurrected, you're wasting your time as Christians. Because there are a lot of philosophies out there. I, Paul, am a well-educated man. Paul was from Tarsus, and at that time, Tarsus was the city, it was a college town. It was the great intellectual city of the Greek world at that point. And Paul came out of that milieu. He had gone to school. He had the shingle on the wall that he could talk all the talk and walk all the walk with the Aristotelians and the Stoics and all this and that. He was also a Jew, well-versed in the Old Testament, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, a Pharisee of the Pharisees, he would write later in his letters, saying that he knew this stuff inside and out, and there was nobody who could out-Jew Paul. He was also a Roman citizen, meaning he was one of the elite. Not everybody was a Roman citizen. Very few people were Roman citizens. There were property qualifications. There were heredity qualifications. If you were a Jew like Paul, and Paul's father was a Roman citizen, what that meant was that you were somebody that the Romans thought, we're going to give you a mark of favor by giving you a passport or a green card. So Paul comes to Corinth, and he also goes to Athens and these other Greek cities, and the Greeks, they want to debate with him. And Paul says, I come not to talk philosophy, but to talk about Christ crucified and him only. I'm not interested in your philosophy. I've been there. I've done that. who are sort of wavering, having sort of thoughts. I mean, you know, do we really need to have all this stuff that we want, he died and we're eating his body and drinking his blood. I mean, I have a hard time explaining that to my neighbors and my people at work. So Paul writes in Corinth, and he says, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the good news. The Greek word is the gospel. The good news, the gospel that I proclaimed to you, which you in turn received. Now, what does that tell us first off? The gospel has two functions. It's proclaimed, it's taught, but somebody's got to listen to it. And then he goes on to say that, look at the verbs, it's which you will receive, and which you stand, to which you are being saved, and which you have received. You've received it, past. You're standing there now, present. And you're going to be saved, the future tense. This word, this gospel, is past, present, and future. It's who you are. And it goes on to say, for I have handed on to you of first importance what I in turn have received. Some people like to say, well, Paul made all this stuff up. Paul is the one that made Christianity hard-nosed, moralistic. Paul's the one that we blame for all this stuff. Well, Jesus was sweet and nice and meek and mild. Paul's saying, no, I didn't make up anything. This was given to me. I received it. I experienced it. And then he cites the first, what we call a creed. That Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. Paul sets out the parameters of what it means to be a Christian. You've got to believe that Christ died. Well, that implies Christ lived. There's some people like to say, Jesus he's an idea. He's not a man. Jesus was a man. And he died. And he was buried. Well, that sounds redundant, doesn't it? Well, why does Paul press that point, buried? Because Paul is trying to say that here is somebody who had a physical body. It's not his spirit, but his body. He was dead. You could touch it. You could see it. They stuck him in the tomb. They embalmed him. Islam teaches about Jesus, but they say Christ did not die on the cross. He swooned. He passed out, and his body was taken away. The Apostle Paul, writing 700 years before Muhammad, writes that Christ was dead and buried. This also responds to people who say, oh, these women, Mary Magdalene, they went to the tomb, it was empty. Oh, wrong tomb. I have this problem with my storage locker. I go down there, hey, it's empty and the lock's gone. Well, if I try the other side of the building, I'll find my key where it's one of those locks. What Paul is pointing out here is that there was a body in a tomb that people had been to, they saw it, they didn't get lost. Yet, this body was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. What are the proofs of the gospel? Why should you believe this stuff? Why does it matter? Do you remember a TV show, Seinfeld? I didn't see it the first time around, but because of the wonders of cable TV, I've now seen it many, many times. And one line I really, really enjoy. The character, George Costanza, turns to his friend Jerry and says, Jerry, it's not a lie if you believe it. Now that's considered profound wisdom. George is a terrible liar, and he's such a good liar because he believes his lies. People say, you Christians, you have faith, but it can be a lie. Faith is not a religious word, because you can have faith in lots of things. People in Germany had faith in Adolf Hitler. until the very bitter end. And then he died. And they found it was all a lie. Just because you believe something doesn't make it true. It's faith not by itself, but faith in something. In who and in what? It's faith in Jesus Christ. And Paul tells us in these passages, and there are lots of proofs for the script for Jesus and the resurrection, but he gives us the three main ones. He speaks now of the gospel. He speaks of the Old Testament scriptures, and he then goes on to speak of the witnesses. Now what's the easiest one? The witnesses. Well, goes on to say, he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom were still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, to one untimely born, he also appeared to me. Paul is citing legal justification. You have got witnesses to the resurrected Christ, the Christ with his hands pierced, the Christ that they had saw dead in a tomb. He was alive. And you've got people who will swear to this, not just a kook here and there, but a whole galaxy of people who have witnessed something that is unbelievable. Then we have the documentary evidence. Now, what does that mean? It means the scriptures, the Old Testament, keep pointing again and again. This is how it's going to happen. This is what the Messiah is going to go through. The Psalms tell us his body will not corrupt. Isaiah says that he'll be born of a virgin. And on and on and on and on and on. And all of these things have come to pass in Jesus Christ. And then there's the experience. Experience, which is what Paul is saying. This has been transmitted to me, and you know, folks, I believe it. This has changed my life. I, Paul, was a persecutor of the Christians. I was a Pharisee of the Pharisee, a super Jew, yet God appeared to me. And my life has been changed. And friends, I have to tell you, in my life, that is true as well. My life has been changed by Jesus Christ. And there are so many people in this room now whose stories I could tell. And I'm not even going to pick on Ron. Whose lives have made a difference because they experienced the power of Jesus Christ in their life. Did you read about what happened in northern Nigeria about 2 weeks ago? Boko Haram, the Muslim terrorist group, they went and they raided a girls' boarding school and they kidnapped 104 girls. And the government negotiated release, and 103 got on the buses to take them back to their family and to school. The 104th was a girl named Layla, 15 years old. Boko Haram said, to get on the bus, you have to recite the Shahada. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, which in Muslim terms makes you a Muslim. This little girl refused to do that, 15 years old. And she remains to this day in captivity because she would not denounce Jesus Christ. She would not throw out her faith. Friends, this was a predominantly Christian school. It wasn't the only Christian, but this little girl chose, frankly, martyrdom. We don't know what her fate is, and it's not going to be good. This is the experience argument. Over the last 2,000 years, men and women have lived and died because Christ is so powerful in their lives. They can't turn it away. Why does the resurrection matter? Why can it be proven? Well, for some people it can never be proven scientifically. We have witnesses, we have legal or forensic evidence, we have predictive evidence, the documentation of the Old Testament, with the experience of the believers who throughout history have known how Christ has transformed them and changed them. Why does this stuff matter? Because without Christ, friends, our efforts are all we've got. We basically then have to do the best that we can. Our choices are, maybe Epicureanism. Let's have a lot of fun today because it really doesn't matter because tomorrow we die. Or, well, there's all this great infinite majesty of the land and the people, and we're all part of a living organism, the earth, and one day we'll return to the soil and fertilize the next generation. Yeah, be a star. There are plenty of choices out there that have credible intellectual histories. But what the one choice that changes your life, that allows you to escape pain and degradation of sin and death, is Jesus Christ. The gospel's out there. Paul tells us, I'm preaching it, you've got to receive it. You've got to receive it. You've got to act upon it. You've got to live it out. It's not just wise words that you can watch on TV or read in a book. It is a way of life that changes everything about you. So that people ask, what is it about you? They're not here this morning, so I can talk about it. We have a new couple who've come to this church. And the husband, like many husbands, comes out of sufferance because his wife wants to come. But he's turned and he's talked to one or two people, and he's told people that after he's been here a few times, I want what they have. And we're not talking about the cupcakes. He looks at the heart and the faces of people. Why are they different? What is different about their life that I don't understand, that I don't have? What it's called is the grace and power of Jesus Christ. Because Christ died on the cross, each and every one of you have the gift of the Holy Spirit implanted in your heart. That's what happens at baptism. And because that Spirit is there, you don't have to go out and search for it. You don't have to go climb mountains or meditate all day long. It's there. You just have to respond to that gospel, that word. These aren't religious phrases. Faith, gospel. Gospel only means good news. But they have a religious meaning when they're focused on one thing. That's the person and work of Jesus Christ. Friends, we live in a wonderful time, in a wonderful place. We're not going to be kidnapped. We're not going to be persecuted. The worst that's going to happen is a bunch of hillbillies. We'll tease you at the diner. That's not a really bad thing to happen in your life. I give as good as I get. I remind them that they'll be in hell and I'll be waving at them. You're hot now, wait till it's then. Friends, we live in a wonderful life. Yet the questions that so many of us face are not new ones. They're the questions that Paul had to deal with 2,000 years ago, and until Christ comes, every generation is going to have to deal with it again. How do we live? What do we focus on? What's important? And friends, what I'm telling you is that it's Jesus Christ. You may not have enough proof to satisfy yourself. I can't do anything about that. I can only say, folks, in my life, it has made all the difference. And there are hundreds, thousands, millions of people around this world who can confirm and testify to that. Open yourself to the power of the Spirit given to you by the gift of Christ, who died for you to take away your sin and grant you life eternal. Amen.
Amen.
Friends, would you please stand and join with me in saying the night